Well, welcome again to this Indonesia-Singapore Business Forum. I'd like to thank the ambassador, Indonesian ambassador in Singapore. Pat, thank you for inviting the Straits Times to be part of this event and for inviting me to moderate this opening session. The theme, as we know, is Rising Stronger Together. And our first topic this morning is renewables as the key growth engines in the post-COVID economy. So I think for our topic, for our panel, it's not just rising stronger together, but rising more in a more green fashion together. And I can't think of a better place to start today's conversation with a focus on renewables and the energy transition that we all need to make. And to do that, as we've heard, we have a very distinguished panel, Pak Alengka Hartarto, who is the Indonesian Coordinating Minister for Economic Affairs, Minister Tan See Leng, who is Singapore's Minister for Manpower and Second Minister for Trade and Industry, and Dr. Jeffrey Jeshun Hakit, who is the Group Chief Investment Officer of the GIC in Singapore. Now, time is short, so I'm going to jump right in to ask a few questions. The WTO chief describes the present situation as a polycrisis, meaning we are facing multiple crises all playing out at the same time. First of all, we have COVID-19, which we are all happy to see is receding, but it's still with us and could come back to haunt us down the road. So it's not gone away by any chance, by any stretch of the imagination. Then again, you have the Ukraine war, which was the focus of discussions at the Davos conference this year, where Indonesia had a very impressive turnout and impressive presence, but Ukraine was very much on people's minds. And the impact not only on the geopolitical but geostrategic implications, which were also discussed here in Singapore during the Shangri-La Dialogue last week, over the weekend. And the impact on food and energy and rising prices and inflation, and also the threat of a recession, which could come sooner than we all hope. But beyond all of that, we know that there is this looming crisis of climate change, which is real and which is relentless. And one of the key podcasts that we do at the Straits Times is called Green Pulse, and it is one of the most popular and most downloaded podcasts, which I think says to me the interest that the audience has in sustainability issues and how we're going to grapple with this energy, this transition to a more green economy that we know we have to make, despite all these other challenges in this polycrisis that we're facing. So I thought I'd jump straight in by posing a question to, first of all, to our two distinguished ministers, and essentially to ask you, given this many crises that you're in government, that leaders in government are having to deal with, what do you think that government leaders could do to accelerate the transition to a greener economy? And I'd ask, what can you do specifically in your governments in Indonesia and Singapore? And also, what could you do together between Indonesia and Singapore? And perhaps I start with Pak Alengka. Maybe you can kick off the discussion, and then I'll ask Minister Tan to join us as well. Pak, please.
Thank you, Warren Fernandez. And I would like to give appreciation to Pak Duta Besar, Pak Tommy, and also the Chambers of Commerce of Indonesia and ministers and distinguished guests. I tend to agree with Pak Warren that the world is confronting the unprecedented time, which is actually what usually we call the perfect storms. That the perfect storms is the challenge of 5 Cs. The 5 Cs consists of the COVID-19, conflict Ukraine, which also impacting the commodity as well as the energy and food prices, and then the climate change, then escalation of commodity prices, and the cost of living. So I think these challenges are affecting all countries. And for Indonesia, the challenge of the COVID-19 pandemic, I think also impacting the world, that we have to do the progress of the SDGs is a bit delayed, and Indonesia is also promoting for the economic recovery during the COVID-19. And we have been spending for the government budget to support the livelihood of the peoples as well as to save lives in a year is almost around 1,700 trillion rupiah. And we see that the growth has been corrected by World Bank and other global financial institutions, that global growth has decelerated from 5.5% in 2021 to 4.1% in 2022, and expected that it will be slower again to the 3.6. The most important things for the energy transition is to obtain the just and affordable energy transitions. And during the discussion in Davos, one of the most issues that every country are looking at is their own energy security. So there is 3 words for energy, that is just, affordable, as well as energy security. So the issues of energy security is the short-term one because of this conflict of Ukraine war, that the price of gas as well as oil has been soaring. And they are looking into an alternative energy that can bring the cost of energy down. And in the midterms, of course, to still continue the transformation of the green energy. For Indonesia, during this G20 leadership, Indonesia would like to see the projects of a showcase in which we would like to make a project of financing of phasing down around 5.5 gigawatt of the power plant, the steam coal power plant, to a renewable energy. And the mechanism of the funding is at the moment being prepared by multinational or international financing, such as Asian Development Bank. So I think it's very important to see how the model can work, and if the models can be working, then we can replicate anywhere else. As for the collaboration between Indonesia and Singapore, we are looking into few projects in the renewable area. Indonesia is developing based on the geothermal, hydropower, wind turbine, as well as on the solar panel. I think I would like to stop here for the next Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Airlangga. Minister Tan, can I have your comments?
Thank you. Very good morning, Pak Airlangga and Ibu. I think Ibu Milani just walked in. Pak Perry and Pak Tommy. Thank you very much for inviting myself to this very, very successfully organized conference. And I want to take this opportunity to wish everyone, all the distinguished ladies and gentlemen, guests here, a very, very good, safe and warm morning. I think that given where we are today, I think all the more important, countries internationally should work even more closer together. I think in terms of international collaboration, because climate change, global climate change is really an existential issue for many, in fact, for all countries all over the world. So how we look at it in terms of working towards managing this is obviously first in terms of our own domestic policies, how we can shape, how we can nudge behavior to move towards a carbon neutral eventuality. And of course, then we really want to embark on even closer collaborative and cooperative efforts internationally with all of the countries in the world. And Indonesia, of course, being our closest neighbor, we look forward to working very, very closely with our close Indonesian partners to see how we can enhance we can achieve a win-win partnership for our very closely intertwined economies and businesses itself. So to that end, perhaps I could share a little bit about our own domestic policy in which we have come together as a whole of nation. I think yourself included, of course, with Jeff, with the support of GIC and Temasek as well. How we think about is that last year we embarked on a whole of nation initiative to start the Singapore Green Plan, which we hope to achieve that by 2030. So incumbent on it, we have got 5 broad key pillars. Energy transition is one key pillar. The rest, so the energy reset, the green economy, sustainable living, city in nature, and a resilient future. So I would just focus on the green economy pillar. So with the green economy pillar, we have 3 prongs. The first prong is, how do we help our key industries, for instance, like the energy and chemical sector, to decarbonize? So to that end, we put in place policies, we put in place initiatives to encourage industries to pursue energy-efficient initiatives, energy-efficient solutions, and to also incorporate sustainable practices in the way they have and they come about in terms of their daily operations itself. In November last year, we also released the Sustainable Jurong Island Report. And I think that if you have not had the opportunity, perhaps you could review it. And I think there are quite exciting ideas to see how and what some of our plans are to transform Jurong Island into a sustainable energy and chemical hub and park itself. Of course, our EDB, the Economic Development Board, is also working very closely with the energy and chemical sector to develop low-carbon solutions to attract more sustainable investments here, as well as to increase the output of sustainable products itself. Now, the second pillar within this green economy pillar, the second prong approach that we have adopted is we will also grow new sectors. We will help businesses and workers to seize opportunities in the green economy. So, of course, one of the areas that we're looking to grow is really in the carbon services and trading sort of sector itself. We believe that robust carbon markets, very high carbon credits can enable companies and countries to achieve their climate ambition. And this can also attract investments. I think it can spawn off multiple industries within that same prong itself. So to that end itself, Enterprise Singapore, ESG, has launched the Enterprise Sustainability Program. Our enterprise financing schemes has also been tweaked to provide greater access to more green financing schemes itself. Now, third, obviously, we're going to invest significantly in research and development in our initiatives. I think the government has committed 25 billion, or about 1% of our GDP, into a RIE, which is Research, Innovation, and Enterprise Initiative, to develop low carbon emission solutions, to also go into development of CCUS, which is carbon capture, utilization, storage, as well as low carbon hydrogen. And that has spawned off last year a separate initiative where we funded 55 million, we invested 55 million into a low carbon energy research funding initiative itself. So a combination of domestic policies. We hope, of course, for closer international collaboration, because I think it's very, very important. I mean, we are very, very glad that countries all over the world have stepped up as a result of the COP26 initiative last year, to step up their global ambition. It is an excellent development for all of us. And of course, our very close collaboration between Indonesia and Singapore itself, I think, augurs well. So in spite of the COVID-19 crisis, both our business investments, the FDIs, have continued to grow. So I look forward to working very closely with our counterparts, especially with Pak Airlangga, to see how we can jointly collaborate, develop, and invest in more of these green initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Pak Airlangga has given us 5 C's and you've given us 5 pillars to think about. But let me get Jeffrey's reaction to that. From a business perspective, you've heard the ministers spell out their plans and their ideas. what does business want most from governments to help them make this green transition?
Thanks very much, Warren. And I want to echo my thanks for being invited to be able to participate in this. I think for businesses and for investors, clarity is really important. I mean, the world is inherently uncertain. Many of the technologies that are required, the investments that are required to allow for energy transition, for greening industrial processes and so on, involve a fair amount of risk. And the environment in which governments set the parameters for companies becomes very important, because so long as that environment remains very uncertain, then companies put a risk premium, they demand a higher hurdle before they invest, and so actually postpone many of the investments that are necessary to be put in early for energy transition. So I think governments have a big part to play in setting first the overall context. So, whether it's trying to get to net zero by 2050, 2060, providing a kind of timeline for which businesses can see that there is real push towards certain targets is very important. Then I think the second is really government's understanding that drawing in capital and drawing in the investments that are necessary could involve the government in setting even kind of tighter, if you will, kind of risk parameters around the investments. So an example would be investing in energy generation that is green going forward. Obviously, the project risk is potentially enormous. And so having either governments come in with standardized PPAs where people can know that, look, if we're going to go and invest in a particular country, the PPAs will look in a certain way, will stand up to regulatory and legal frameworks. Having that is quite important. I think at times, even that is not enough, and having the government being the first mover, potentially, because many of the investments, the payoff will be several years down the road, and the private sector may not be able to get the financing necessary to be able to invest, with payoffs that are 10 years or 15 years down the road. However, governments can make that initial investment and then transfer it to the private sector at a later stage, either by privatizing it or so on. So that initial investment or partnership by the governments can also be very important. I think with that, with the clarity around the environment, with certain helps that de-risk certain parts of the investment, I think the private sector is willing and eager to actually come alongside.
So a certain clarity and consistency in the investment approach towards energy transition. Okay. I'd like to also bring the discussion back to G20, because a lot of the discussion is about collaboration, right, across countries, bilaterally, but also on a multilateral fashion. And maybe this is a question both for all panelists. What do you see as possibilities given the G20 summit this year, which Indonesia is hosting and chairing? Maybe I could start with you, Pak Alanga. How do you see the G20 opportunity as a way of ensuring that we get this energy transition, given the fact that energy security has become topmost of many people's minds? How do we ensure that we don't get sort of derailed and sidetracked from the focus on the energy transition?
One of the priorities for the G20 outcomes will be on the energy transition, in which the energy transition, it has to be just, affordable, as well as it has the component of energy security in each countries. So how to balance between just, affordables, and energy securities, it will becoming the challenge. And in order to bridge the gap between the transition of energy price and affordable price for the peoples, of course, the component of financing will becoming a key component, how to bridge the gap. as well as how to incentivize the green energy to be implemented in the midterms. The policy of during the COPs, as well as each country, including Indonesia, we have a target of net zero at the mid-centuries, which is 2060 or earlier. And during the G20 meetings, we try to make the prototype or lighthouse of the energy transition projects. So this will becoming a key that the energy transition projects in renewable can be a showcases. For Indonesia, there are a few options that Indonesia currently develop the wind turbine and then also the solar panels. The roof solar panels, we can say that this is a policy of democratization of energy, since the solar panel can be small in the size for individuals, retail houses, as well as big sizes like floating panel or factory roof panel, which is in Java Island itself. It has potential about 5 gigawatts. So the role of technology that is also important, that the renewable energy should be costly competitive in order to make the rate that is affordable. So economic of scale is important. So there are 3 components of the just and affordable energy transition. That is the access of technology, as well as technology affordability. And then, of course, the market itself, and a combination of both through green financing. The government itself of Indonesia, through Minister of Finance, we also developing and launching, for instance, like green sukuk bond, as well as to do carbon pricing that is based on cap on trade, and Indonesia applying around $2.1 or 30,000 per ton of CO2 equivalent. I think for the G20, the deliverables of pilot plan will be becoming a key. So the meeting, the G20 meetings is not only making a summary of narrative, but also a summary of live projects that can be showcased to the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Pa. I'll come back to the issue of green financing with Jeffrey in a minute. But first, Minister, how do you see the G20 playing a role?
Well, I fully agree with Jeff's earlier assessment in terms of clarity, and also I'm very heartened to hear of the multiple initiatives that Pak Airlangga has shared with the rest of us. Thank you. I think it's important that we work closely together to collaborate in terms of discussions, and I think these multilateral discussions, very open and frank discussions under this sustainable energy transition pillar, especially at the G20 meetings itself, would be very, very useful in terms of providing that clarity, so that countries can then come together, particularly in ASEAN, within this particular region itself, we can come together to see how we can coordinate, we can sync up our efforts, and also both either invest or innovate and really cooperate to develop a good sort of outcome towards net zero together. Now, I think having said that, the other thing about this climate change action plan, I think would be contingent on countries, particularly within the region itself, collaborating to see how we can establish on a broader scale, international markets for carbon and also renewable energy trade. And also then set up new supply chains in terms of trade and goods that can facilitate this type of trading. as I said earlier on, co-develop renewable energy sources, as well as carbon abatement services projects, and how do we then jointly do research and development into developing new technologies to provide for this. So I think it's very pertinent in terms of the risks as well as the costing for such projects, as shared by Jeff as well. I think that when countries come together, when that clarity is provided in terms of pathways, that cost actually can be distributed and can be shared. And likewise with that, the risk profile, given the fact that the clarity also breeds certainty, the risk profile actually drops. And I think with that, you can actually get a lot more confidence from the private sector to come in to invest in that public sector. So I thought that regional forums like this, fora like this kind of platforms for discussion, I think certainly serve as very, very useful conduit. And once again, I thank Pak Tommy for organizing this forum, so that we can all come together and then discuss what is needed and move forward. And today, I think in this particular era, this is a perfectly wonderful opportunity, especially in ASEAN, for regional, especially close neighbors, for instance, like Singapore, Indonesia, and the rest of the ASEAN neighbors, to come together to develop a regional grid, because I think for renewable energy particularly, because I think that the possibilities in terms of carbon abatement, in terms of achieving net zero within the middle part of this century itself, really these opportunities are great, and I think that the target is at hand. Thank you.
Certainly a regional grid would be a physical manifestation of rising stronger together.
Right. Yes.
Jeffrey, you want to take up the point about green financing?
Yes, absolutely. I think maybe before that, I just want to make the point that I think Indonesia is particularly well endowed to take the lead in terms of renewable energy. I mean, first from a natural resource point of view, not only hydro, but geothermal and the potential for solar. I mean, these are not available in all countries, as we know. And so the opportunity for Indonesia is huge. The second is that from a demand point of view, Indonesia is just at the cusp of really kind of a continued explosion in growth. And the demand for energy in the future can be met by renewable energy, as opposed to having to deal with a whole legacy of old fossil fuel generation that you need to transition. So I think the opportunity is there. The ability, I think, for Indonesia to work with countries like Singapore and other areas where there's already a collective of financial investors who are looking for projects is a high good opportunity. In terms of green finance, then, there are either two ways of looking at it. One is actually having projects and fundings that are, again, standardized, easy for investors to understand, and you can get very kind of affordable financing for that. The second is the more complex project finance that really requires Indonesian entrepreneurs to work closely with potentially capital providers to structure, along with the government, a way in which to finance that is a win-win for all involved. So I think that there's many opportunities for Indonesia and Singapore to work together in terms of green finance in both the kind of project-ready financing as well as more complex ones.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Unfortunately, time is the most non-renewable resource on the planet, and the little screen in front of me has gone from green to red, which is a clear signal to me. I think you will all agree with me that we've had a very interesting start to the conversation this morning, and the focus on the topic, rising stronger together. I think rising stronger and greener together is really a good way to start this morning's proceeding. So could you please join me in thanking the two ministers and my fellow panelists for this discussion. Thank you.